All right, so explanation and qualitative questions. So the ones that are just a little bit more, we already talked about some of the simpler descriptive or explanation questions that are worth around 3 marks. Now we're going to go into ones that are worth a few more marks, that you have to go into a little bit more depth, which again test your qualitative understanding of biological phenomena. They'll test your ability to be able to describe and explain slightly more complex processes or formulate hypotheses based on information provided. They may even come at the end of a quantitative question. So, you might be asked to make some calculations, interpret some data, and then to be able to give a more in-depth explanation of what you're seeing. They'll be slightly longer. There may be multiple linked points. So, this biological phenomenon is due to this, which is due to this. There might be several sort of like layers that you need to go into. The command words are going to be similar to what we said before: explain, describe, outline, or comment. For instance, using your knowledge, explain this. They may sometimes say using your knowledge and the information in figure 1 or and the information in the graph. So they might actually explicitly tell you what you need to explain your answer. Explain why, analyze how, comment on. Let's look at the outline questions in a little bit more detail. And they can be a little bit similar to describe questions. However, outline as a command word definitely tells you that you, of course, need to use correct terminology. You can structure your answer in bullet points. In fact, I would say that you can always structure your answer in bullet points unless it's an extended response question where you are explicitly told that you get marks for clarity of expression of your answer. It helps the examiner, but it also helps you to be able to glance at your answer and assess whether you've addressed all the marks that the question is worth. Let's see an example. And again, as with described questions, you don't need to give any explanation or justification for what you're saying. So ecologists investigated changes in grassland communities on large islands off the coast of Scotland between 1975 and 2010. On each island, they used data from a number of sites to determine the change in mean species richness and the change in mean index of diversity. Outline the method that the ecologists could have used to determine the plant species richness at one site. Let's break down the question into our 3 parts again. So my context is all of this. Context. So it tells me that I'm dealing with these concepts of my specification: species richness, index of diversity. My command word here is, of course, outline, and my direction is the method that the scientists can use to determine the species richness at one site. So only the species richness, right? I'm not going to talk about the index of diversity. That's kind of like superfluous information here. So the ecologist could have selected the various places to sample at random at the example at the site. At the site, example, a map grid with coordinates selected using a random number generator. So here I'm explaining how they're going to sample at random. They could have placed the quadrant at these various randomly selected places. So I'm stating the equipment that I'm going to use. They could then have counted the number of different plant species present in each of the quadrants. So what exactly are they going to measure for that? So I know from my specification that species richness basically is the number of different plant species. And so that is what they're going to measure. So I'm outlining, I'm just literally step by step describing how the study should be set up with specificity though. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the approach to outlining or describing a experimental technique. Read your answer back and check if it fully answers the questions asked. And this is, like this is a strategy for your exam anyway. Some students, and I think this is a good technique, you can make sure that you go through the entire paper, make sure that you don't run out of time, especially if you struggle with that you address all questions, and then use any time that you've got left in the end to go back and check your questions. And this is where structuring them in bullet point formats is going to help you, because you can sort of easily assess whether you've addressed all marking points. Basically, go back and look at your answer as if you were an examiner, to the extent that this is possible, and say, okay, would that be a mark? Would that be a mark?